Welcome, everyone. My name is Matt Del Bono, and I'm an Extension Support Specialist with the Greenhouse Lighting and Systems Engineering Consortium. Today, you're going to be hearing a State of the CEA Industry update from our Principal Investigator, Dr. Neil Matson, and our Executive Director, Gretchen Schimmelpenninck. The first video in this three-part series will cover New York State market growth. In the second video, we'll focus on technology development. And in the third video, we will cover technology adoption and impact. Before we get started, I want to take a moment and introduce you to our organization. At GLASE, our mission is to transform greenhouse lighting and systems management to support climate-smart CEA. To do so, we research LED systems engineering, plant photobiology and physiology, and greenhouse environmental controls to commercialize emerging technology, improve business performance for growers, and reduce the carbon footprint of greenhouse operations. GLASE partners include Cornell University, Rutgers University, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and our founding partner is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA. At GLASE, we accomplish our goals through research and technology transfer. We also provide a broad range of educational opportunities like our courses, webinars, and other resources in our library. And finally, we seek to help the CEA industry network, build community, and generate business at our online and in-person meetings. Please reach out to our team if you are interested in learning more about GLASE and our member benefits, and thank you for tuning in.
Hello and welcome. You're here with the Greenhouse Lighting and Systems Engineering Consortium of Cornell University, and we're here to provide you with a State of the Controlled Environment Agriculture Industry update. Neil?
Hi, everyone. I'm Neil Matson. I'm a professor in plant science at Cornell University and academic principal investigator of GLASE.
And I'm Gretchen Schimmelpenninck. I'm the executive director of GLASE, and we're excited to dive into some data with you today. So we're going to talk about a few things in a few short videos. And so in our first video, we're going to talk about New York State CEA market growth, how we projected it would grow and how it actually has grown. We'll also talk about technology development, how we projected we would develop technology and how it has been launched in the industry, both by us and others. And then lastly, we'll talk about how different technology has been adopted and the impact it's had on the greenhouse industry in the US. So Neil, why don't you tell us a little bit about the beginning of GLASE and how in 2015 you projected the New York State CEA industry would grow?
Sure thing. So GLASE came about as a collaborative project with NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And back in 2015 and 2016, we were looking at the growth of the greenhouse industry in New York State and trying to understand what future growth would be, as well as what their energy needs are, so that New York State can be strategic in meeting our energy targets for the future. So we looked at data from the USDA Census of Agriculture and Census of Horticultural Specialties. And we had data going back from 2012 and 2017. And then we had to predict, based on that, what the growth would be of different segments of the industry. And so at that time, we predicted that the floriculture industry was a relatively mature industry, and we did not actually expect it to grow in terms of acres of production. And then the greenhouse vegetable industry was a quicker growing industry. And so we did predict double-digit increases each year. And something that was less known to us at the time was the development of the cannabis or hemp industry, either in greenhouses or in plant factories, as well as the vegetable plant factories as well. So they were smaller segments overall, but we did predict some growth in them.
Thanks for explaining the methodology. And so on that slide, you could see that we expected around 1,000 acres to be present in New York State from the floriculture and vegetable greenhouse industry. You can see the other segments Neil was talking about stacked on top of that. But if you just kind of consider those two largest segments, we expected around 1,000 acres. And so how did those acres maybe get broken down? On our next slide, we show how in New York State, those were broken down into a few different segments, like Neil was talking about, floriculture being a huge segment for New York State as well as the US as a whole. And then other smaller segments, including important ones that we saw would have a lot of growth, like vegetables and herbs and tomatoes. Any thoughts on this slide, Neil?
Yes, so the data that we were able to look at was from the most recent Census of Agriculture, which just came out now in 2024, and it's based on data from 2022. And so, as we'll talk about, we have seen expansion both in the floriculture industry as well as even higher than expected expansion in the vegetable and tomato industries.
And so I like to see these two side by side just to see the similarities and differences between New York State, a pretty large CEA industry for the country, and then the US as a whole, and see some similarities like the size of perhaps the tomato industry is pretty similar, the size of in terms of proportion, 44 to 41%, pretty similar for floriculture, but there's some stark differences, for example, in vegetable and herbs. That's a huge portion for New York State, where it's a much smaller portion for the US as a whole. So just wanted to draw those comparisons for folks watching and listening.
Another thing I like to look at in this graph is the diversity of the industry. So there are also interesting segments here like mushrooms, nursery crops, propagated materials, and increasingly fruit and berries are being grown under protection too.
Yeah, strawberries is definitely something we've been talking about more and more. And so if we take a look at the square footage on the next slide, this is again comparing New York State and the US using the same USDA report that's from 2022 data, but published in 2024. And so one of the things that we wanted to show is that the square footage is similar to the breakdown for the number of facilities. In fact, it's even more slanted towards floriculture. Any other comments that you wanted to bring to the table here, Neil? One thing I just in general wanted to bring back to the 1,000 acres comment is that we haven't reached 1,000 acres. This is around 881 acres.
So room for expansion still to meet our projections. One thing I'd point out is in New York State, if we think of tomatoes, vegetables, and herbs, tomatoes are a relatively large part of the CEA industry in New York State, versus nationally, tomatoes are about half of the total food crops that are produced under protection. And so lettuce and cucumbers and herbs and so on collectively make up about the same amount as tomatoes.
Yeah, so some things that you can't see in this data is that in New York State, 7 out of every 10 acres of greenhouse crops is a floriculture crop. This is slightly different from US in that that's like 58% floriculture at the US level. And then what Neil was saying about tomatoes, 14% of our crop area in New York State is for tomatoes, and that grew by 31% between 2017 and 2022. Whereas for the US, that's only about 5% of the US CEA industry footprint. And for New York State, the largest growing category, the fastest growing crop category is vegetables and herbs, which is not necessarily the largest category today, but we should be seeing that category grow in the next time the USDA releases this report. And so let's talk about value. Neil, what are you seeing in this data, having been working with commercial growers in New York State for some time?
Yes, I want to divide up this table and point out, so on the left side are the columns for greenhouse vegetables, herbs, and tomatoes. In terms of acreage, over the last 5 years, those have grown by 26%. But what's really impressive to me is that by wholesale farm gate value, these have grown by 74%. So producers are able to be more efficient with the space that they have, and produce a disproportionately larger amount of economic value from that space. So to me, that's really great in terms of efficiency of operations. And then I was pleased to see the greenhouse floriculture segment, which is on the right here. In the last 5 years, there was an 18% increase in production area, which is wonderful because there had been some declines during like the recession of 2008 and so on. And then again, we are seeing disproportionately larger farm gate value come out of that space because we saw a 34% increase in the production value over the last 5 years.
And so to put that in national context, New York is third in the nation in economic value behind California and Ohio for CEA. And greenhouse floriculture is sixth in the nation for New York. So this is helpful information for hopefully people, even if you're not located in New York State, to see how a kind of powerhouse of greenhouse veggies and floriculture is behaving in the past 10 years. So let's talk more about technology in our next video.